The Physical Institute, Wurzburg, Germany, 1953. A visit to Wilhelm Conrad Roentgen's laboratory, the site of the discovery of X-rays. Presented at the meeting of the X-ray Technicians Society of New York State, Utica, New York, October 1953. Editor's note: many items in the Roentgen room and other parts of the Physical Institute have not been mentioned in this article because of the amount of space required to do so. The author has attempted to give only the highlights of his visit to the Institute. Prologue. I have taken the liberty to expand my written presentation of the Institute some 58 years ago by adding additional photos taken during the visit to this video presentation to provide the viewer with a much broader experience of my visit. In February 1953, I was sent to Wurzburg, Germany for temporary duty at the 10th Field Hospital. This assignment, I felt, would be of great benefit to me, for I knew Wurzburg was the site where Wilhelm Conrad Roentgen discovered X-rays on the memorable evening of November 8, 1895. Aware of the opportunities which lay before me, I set off on my journey with the definite purpose of visiting the Physical Institute at the University of Wurzburg, where Roentgen resided as professor of physics during the period of his great discovery. Upon arrival at the 10th Field Hospital, I assumed the duties of an X-ray technician. In the X-ray department, I was associated with a German physician, Dr. Gudrun Bauer, whom I came to know quite well in the short time I was stationed there. Much of our leisure time was spent in discussing the University of Wurzburg, where Dr. Bauer had received her education. During the course of our conversations, I acquired enough courage to ask her for aid in gaining an audience with Professor Kulenkampf, present director of the Physical Institute. Professor Kulenkampf is the last remaining assistant of the late Wilhelm Roentgen, and I felt that if anyone knew the saga of the discovery of X-rays, Professor Kulenkampf would be that one. Dr. Bauer immediately sent a letter to Professor Kulenkampf requesting permission to visit the Physical Institute and to photograph Roentgen's early apparatus. A very prompt reply was received from the professor, stating his admiration for the interest in Roentgen's work and setting a time which would be suitable for our visit. Approximately 1 week from the day the request was sent, Dr. Bauer and I were walking along Roentgen Ring Strasse on our way to the famed physicist's laboratory. As we drew near the building, I noticed at the extreme left upon the wall, in clear, readable lettering, a commemoration of Roentgen's contribution to mankind. It reads as follows: "In this house, W.C. Roentgen, in the year 1895, discovered the rays which are named for him." A few moments after we rang the doorbell, the housemaster beckoned us to follow him, and upon reaching the secretary's office on the second floor of the quaint old building, we were informed that Professor Kulenkampf was not present at the time, but would return shortly. The secretary, being a most congenial person, added to the enjoyment of our visit during the absence of the professor by introducing us to his two assistants, physicists Scheer and Ziedler. Both are engaged in assisting Professor Kulenkampf in present-day research and instructing students. The first impression of the two assistants was their very friendly and cooperative attitude. Throughout our visit, they eagerly endeavored to give us authentic and detailed information concerning Roentgen's life and work. Immediately following an exchange of courteous respects which were demonstrated in a gallant fashion by a slight bowing from the waist, we were escorted by our two cordial hosts to the now famous Roentgen room. As the door was being unlocked, several questions flashed through my mind. What is behind this archaic door, which is guarded so well? What is to be seen that revolutionized medicine and the physical world to such an extent? In a moment, I thought, all questions will be answered, satisfying my curious mind which had brought me here, to seek them out. A click of the lock, a turn of the knob, now the room, which once was an important part in Roentgen's life, lay before me. No larger than 12 by 24 feet, and illuminated by a single window, this room imbues a person entering it the first time with a spirit of adventure. The room also has an atmosphere of restfulness, for it is neither crowded nor vacant. It holds many items of interest, rows upon rows of books, a desk, photographs, tubes, awards, stuffed birds roosting on lofts attached to the wall, animal pelts spread over the floor, and many other objects. The silence, which lingered after we opened the door, was broken abruptly by Scheer asking whether we would prefer looking around by ourselves or having Zeidler and himself describe the room and its contents. Naturally, we accepted his invitation and became members of a guided tour. The first object the assistants brought to our attention was Roentgen's desk. The desk is an antiquated piece of furniture much in vogue during the 1890s. At first sight, the most striking portion of the desk is its top. Neatly placed and covered by a rectangular piece of glass whose length is 4 times its width are photographs of the very first X-rays and experiments Roentgen accomplished. Most predominant of all is a reproduction of the first X-ray Roentgen prepared for the world to see, a radiograph of his wife's hand. The original X-ray of Frau Roentgen's hand is housed in the Deutsches Museum in Munich, Germany. The exact factors used for the production of this radiograph are quite impossible to state. As Professor Kulenkampf remarked, considering we have no true knowledge of the exact tube Roentgen used, and realizing these early tubes tend to become harder after use, I cannot say with any exactness what factors were employed for this Roentgenogram. Probably 55 to 60 kVp and anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes or longer. As for milliamperes, it would be senseless to quote a certain number. There are too many uncertain factors to cope with. Another early X-ray which Roentgen produced was that of Geheimrath von Kolliker's hand. This was made at the formal announcement of the discovery of X-rays, which took place at the Physical Institute, where Roentgen addressed the Medical Physical Society of the University of Wurzburg on January 23, 1896. Geheimrath von Kolliker was head of the anatomy department and so wished to have Roentgen produce an X-ray of his hand to present to the rest of his associates at the meeting. Note the difference in density and contrast between the two X-rays. A couple of months spent in bettering the method used in the first produced wonderful results. Another radiograph of interest in this room is that showing one of Roentgen's early experiments in determining the penetration ability of X-rays have upon different type metals. This was done by placing zinc, platinum, lead, and aluminum adjacent to each other and exposing them to X-rays. The result, he noticed, was that some metals are more penetrable by the rays than others, this being shown through the different densities which are formed on the radiograph. Also, a radiograph of Roentgen's double-barrel shotgun showing the pellets in the barrel. Situated at the extreme top of the desk in the left-hand corner is a life-size bust of Roentgen displaying a true likeness of the dexterous discoverer. Adjacent to the bust is a clay mold of Roentgen's hands, cast immediately after death. The right hand crossed over the left gives a restful appearance. The fingers are extraordinarily long and slender, resembling the hands of a pianist. In the right-hand corner of the desk are two photographs of Roentgen's parents, both circumscribed in time-honored frames. It is interesting to note the striking likeness between Roentgen and his father. We next moved to the glass enclosed collections of tubes, weights, bits of fluorescent screens, tube stands, etc., etc., displayed on a waist-high table by the desk. The two assistants carefully lifted the glass enclosure and placed it on the floor. Scheer then pointed out the items as he dramatically told the story of each one. There are 4 tubes in all, 1 Hittorf-Crooks tube and 3 early-type gas tubes. These tubes are very small in comparison with the tubes of today, probably 1/4 or 1/5 as large. I inquired concerning the type of metals used in the cathodes, anodes, and anti-cathodes. Ziegler, who appeared completely absorbed in Scheer's explanation, even though he must have heard them 100 times, answered eagerly, "Platinum and aluminum," then showed us by careful observations that the cathodes and anodes were constructed of aluminum and the anti-cathode in gas tubes of platinum. One might have the impression that the tubes in Roentgen's era were crude and ill-shaped. Viewing such tubes from pictures, I would have been inclined to agree, but seeing the tubes before me in all 3 dimensions gave a quite different impression. Scheer next described the remaining items, among them the weights employed by pharmacists and physicists, which Roentgen used to determine whether X-rays penetrated metallic substances, bits of the first fluorescent screens he made of barium plantanocyanide, 2 forms of crystals, powdered and solid. He experimented with crystals in order to determine whether X-rays could be reflected or refracted. The coil he used when experimenting with a magnetic field. He tried to deviate X-rays from their path of travel by these means, but found that X-rays, like light rays, are not affected. We next circled the room very observingly, stopping every so often to examine the various items of interest. In the corner by the door stands a small plain cabinet with a glass front. Resting on the bottom, hanging from nails, and placed on shelves are numerous articles of hunting equipment. Feeling that I had not found anything of great importance, I was about to leave when my eye caught sight of Roentgen's double-barreled shotgun. This is the famous shotgun he used, along with the weights, when determining whether X-rays would penetrate wood and metal. This, I understand, was done within a few days after the discovery. Scheer then led us to the massive rows of books, Roentgen's personal library, which extend from floor to ceiling, occupying more than half of the room. Most of these books are obsolete editions, many of them American. Adjacent to the books, in a small glass cabinet, are Roentgen's awards he received for his noble discovery. To list a few: the Rumford Medal of the Royal Society in 1896, the Royal Merit of the Bavarian Crown, the Order of the Iron Cross from Germany, the Honorary Degree of Doctor of Medicine from the University of Wurzburg, and the Nobel Prize of 1901. This, incidentally, was the first Nobel Prize ever to be presented for an accomplishment in physics. While discussing these awards, our conversation was suddenly broken by the soft words, "Guten Tag." Not having heard this voice before, I quickly turned to see a small figure partially overcast by the dimness of the hall, standing in the doorway. In a moment, Scheer introduced the man, who had a very dignified expression on his youthful-appearing face, as Professor Kulenkampf. Immediately following a hearty handshake, I explained the purpose of my visit. The professor nodded with approval, indicating that he was very much pleased with the interest we Americans show in Roentgen's accomplishment. In an informal manner, the professor then related many facts of Roentgen's discovery and life, which a book account could never quite equal. Time, the never-ending constituent of life, had chalked up another 20 minutes, and having gained the information I desired, along with an ample number of photographs, Dr. Bauer and I brought our most enjoyable visit to a close. Not wanting to overstay our welcome, we expressed our sincere appreciation to Professor Kulenkampf and his two assistants for their helpfulness and for making the visit possible. Thus ended our visit to the laboratory of the late Wilhelm Conrad Roentgen, most celebrated physicist of his era. Epilogue. Although this visit took place 58 years ago, it remains one of my greatest experiences, because it was just one step away from the brilliant mind of Wilhelm Conrad Roentgen, as described to me by his living assistant, Professor Kulenkampf, who was present during this great discovery, and for whom I will always be grateful. This momentous discovery was the foundation for all of today's medical diagnostic imaging modalities, as X-ray, CT, MRI, nuclear, ultrasound, etc. For those interested in historical facts, I offer the following slides which depict the first public view of a working X-ray machine that Professor Roentgen displayed at the Physical Institute at the University of Wurzburg on January 23, 1896. This same machine is displayed as a replica at the Physical Institute in Wurzburg. The original is on display at the Deutsches Museum in Munich, Germany. The heart of the machine is the Ruhmkorff inductor or coil. It is an electrical transformer used to produce high voltage pulses from a low voltage direct current for the production of X-rays produced within the X-ray tube. This presentation was meant to provide the viewer an understanding of the birth of the medical diagnostic imaging field. Thank you for watching.